Hey everyone, let's talk about Mercury stationing retrograde soonish. Okay, so here's a chart for today. And there's Mercury that's just recently entered Leo, just a few hours ago. And Mercury will station retrograde in Leo. Now, today I'm going to look both at the tropical zodiac and the Babylonian zodiac. Those of you that don't know the Babylonian zodiac, it is very similar to the sidereal, but not quite exactly the same. Very close, though. Now, the reason we're going to look at both is because we are going to look at this process of Mercury going retrograde will mean that it will be in the sign of Leo for quite some time versus just being in there for 3.5 weeks or something like that. Even less, I think. So obviously when a planet goes retrograde, it stays in a sign much longer than it normally would. Now, Mercury is a pretty fast-moving body, so it doesn't stay in a sign as long as, for example, Pluto, when that goes retrograde, in a sign, it's there for months, right? So there's always a difference relative to the speed of the planet. So Mercury going retrograde in Leo will actually then, in its retrograde journey, it will come back and it will form a conjunction to the sun when the sun is in Leo, which will be a Kazemi. Kazemi is an old Arabic word that means in the heart of the sun. Now, actually, let me just back up. At the moment, Mercury is in his evening star phase. And Mercury changes in its cycle in a much more unpredictable manner, as Ruman showed us in the previous presentation that he and I offered. I don't know, it was a few weeks ago now, a couple of weeks ago. The focus was on Mercury. And with his new program, he was just showing us just how unpredictable Mercury can be. It can change sort of more rapidly. It's very different to the other planets in its movement and change relative to morning star and evening star, and or its appearance and disappearance. It can show up at times, and other times it can not show up at all. It's a very unpredictable planet relative to the other ones, and it's really no surprise, as we were talking about it with Roman, think about Mercury. Mercury was the trickster. um, the mythology of Hermes, Mercury, the story that the most famous story is the one where Mercury stole Apollo's cattle and traced his steps backwards to cover them up, right? Um, and that's Mercury retrograde, of course. And subsequently he wanted to make it up to Apollo because Jupiter, the king of the gods, pulled Mercury up to have words with him about his behavior. And Jupiter was so impressed by just how clever and intelligent and quick-minded and humorous Mercury was. Just even as a youngster, he was so smart. I mean, he made that instrument called a lyre, which I think is quite funny because Mercury rules liars and thieves and things like that. So Mercury is a very, very tricky planet. He's a very interesting divinity. Of course, with every planet, there's so many layers. You can look at a planet or an archetype or a divinity, and each planet has different corresponding divinities relative to whether it's a morning star or an evening star. That information, of course, is not in mainstream astrology, nor is it in modern astrology. It derives from Babylonian astrology. So Mercury, soon to form a conjunction to the sun. I'll show you when that happens. When it forms a conjunction to the sun, which will be in tropical Leo, but it will be in Babylonian Cancer. That's called the Kazemi. So that's a portal, a very powerful portal. Every time the sun forms a conjunction to another planet, it's the rebirth, right, of that planet. And it is said to be a very powerful portal for us to contemplate, reflect, step into, embody, and set the intentions of what we wish to experience or manifest right through that portal. Now, the things to consider here are, well, what's the planet? It's Mercury. So what does Mercury have to do with? Well, it has to do with so many different things. You know, it's a big list of things, but generally speaking, Mercury, of course, corresponds to all all levels of communication, written or spoken words. um, pardon me, contracts, ideas, engagement, um, commerce and trade, travel, everything to do with the written and spoken word in all the different ways that can manifest. So there's quite a few levels that Mercury therefore corresponds to. Now, before I go into Mercury's heliacal cycle and where it's going to appear and so forth, because that is pretty much the most important thing, frankly speaking. But before we go there, I just want to say a few words about Mercury stationing retrograde on the 18th of July at 15 degrees of Leo, tropical. Which of course that will be in Cancer in the Babylonian zodiac. So, look, I recommend that you look at both if you have the means to do so, because both will give you a different level of perspective and probably different areas of your chart as well. Although, of course, Cancer and Leo, are adjacent to each other. So, you might have, it depends. If you're looking at, a tropical quadrant chart, you might have those signs in one house. You might not. You might have the signs in adjacent houses. It just depends what sort of chart you are looking at. Are you looking at whole sign houses? Are you looking at a quadrant house system in the tropical chart? Are you looking at your Babylonian chart? There's many ways to look at these things, and I think they are all valid. I guess it's just a question of whether you can make sense of that and connect the dots. And of course, Mercury is the archetype, the planetary divinity that connects the dots. Now, Mercury is a figure or a divinity, of course, that had the ability to move through all dimensions, all worlds. He wasn't limited. And the other goddess that did that was Hecate. She was a goddess that could move through worlds as well. She is a divinity of the underworld, but she had the ability to come up into the upper worlds, so to speak. And Mercury is one of those types of gods. So when Mercury goes retrograde, it is a time of inner reflection and introspection. And in that process of Mercury's retrograde journey, that is a time for us to perhaps retreat and withdraw internally in order to process the different things that we have been considering and thinking about relative to our own life that correspond to Mercury, which is, of course, all our ideas, things we've been thinking about doing or things we've been thinking about starting or creating or conversing or exchanging ideas with other people or collaborating or, whatever it may be. There's numerous levels to this. And then, of course, there's just simply our own internal processes of the collection of data, because that's what Mercury does. It collects data, information, right? So the things that we've been collecting, over a period of time where when Mercury goes retrograde, that's the time when we sort through it all internally. And basically, in that process, we figure out which information, which data is useful to us, is relevant to us, and that we're going to embody and maintain and grow and develop, or that we're going to discard. So, another way to look at Mercury retrograde is to say that Mercury retrograde acts very similar to a Jupiter kind of flavor, because from an evolutionary perspective, Jeffrey Wolf Green says that Mercury retrograde corresponds to our right brain versus our left brain. When Mercury is just moving direct in his motion, it is a very left brain linear process. And when Mercury is retrograde, it activates our right brain, Jupiter, which is very much connected or typically speaks to intuition. So Mercury retrograde kind of throws the whole thing about logic, as it were, out the window, and desires to go deeper into its intuitive faculty in order to process things and understand things from a much more from a deeper and intuitive level. Because you can sit there sometimes and just think about things over and over and over and over, and sometimes that doesn't get you anywhere, right? Because reason and logic, whilst it's necessary, it can also get in the way of tuning into our intuition with the data or information that we are absorbing, observing, perceiving, and collecting. And that's the benefit of Mercury retrograde. It helps us go into that deeper place with everything we've been collecting or learning, and arriving at a place within ourselves where we decide what we wish to continue with and what we wish to discard. So that's another way of considering Mercury retrograde. Now, wherever that's happening in your birth chart, that's the field, the domain, the area of life that's going to be highlighting these things. So first of all, it's about understanding what Mercury represents, moving retrograde, then the house that it's in, and of course the sign matters as well. But because in this case I'm looking at both the tropical and Babylonian zodiacs, we are therefore focusing on both Cancer and Leo, which obviously sit adjacent to each other, but they are quite different. Cancer is about family, security, imagination, intuition, sensitivity, the emotional body, creativity, all those sorts of things. And Mercury, of course, in Leo is also about creativity, but it goes right to the heart. It's about pure self-expression. So you may find that understanding Mercury going retrograde in Leo in the tropical and Cancer in the Babylonian, that it brings up themes, pardon me, from both signs, both different houses in your birth chart. And it doesn't mean that one is more powerful than the other. It just means that focusing on both could just give you valuable information in different ways. So let me just get out of that chart and go into this chart here. So let me see now. So this is the 18th of July. This is Melbourne, Australia. So it'll be the 17th of July for you guys in the Northern Hemisphere. And there's Mercury stationary at 15 degrees of Leo. So that's when the retrograde period begins. And that retrograde period lasts until August 10th. So from 18th of July to August 10th, that's, a process of introspection and reflection and perhaps some reconsideration on certain things that you've been thinking about, projects you've been working on. Sometimes I find that in the retrograde journey, we can get really clear insights, and we can get a really clear sort of understanding, and we may change our mind about something. That's always a possibility. Typically in mainstream astrology, people will say, when a planet is retrograde, um, don't start anything, or don't sort of make a new decision. I don't tend to agree with that perspective, because I think it sort of contradicts in a way what the retrograde process is, which is an inner, and it's an internalized experience of that archetype. So if you are having an internalized experience and you are processing different things, is it not the case that you may change your mind about something, or you may finally get clear about a decision that you've been contemplating and have been, having trouble deciding one way or another? Well, does that not mean then, if you get clear during the retrograde process, that you've made a decision? Of course it does. So just keep an open mind to that. So the next thing is on the it's 31st of July for you guys in the Northern Hemisphere, and it's the 1st of August for us in the Southern Hemisphere. Here we have Mercury retrograde in Leo, 9 degrees conjunct the Sun at 9 degrees of Leo. This is the Cazimi date, the Cazimi portal. This is Mercury being in the heart of the Sun. And this is where Mercury subsequently is going to be reborn as a morning star. Now, when a planet forms a conjunction to the Sun, it is typically its rays, its light, its energy is obscured. So therefore, it is invisible in the sky. Now, there are exceptions, especially with Venus, because Venus every 8 years, it differs in the northern or southern hemisphere. Venus, once every 8 years, does not go invisible at all in certain latitudes. And I've spoken about this extensively, over many videos the last couple of years. So this is the Cazimi point. This is a point where you might, like, for example, even though Mercury is still retrograde, but you might, from the 18th of July till this point here, you might go through, a pretty significant contemplative process mentally with things you are thinking about relative to certain projects or communications, or, this could be somebody writing a book or writing an article, or starting a website, or, connecting, networking more with certain alliances and businesses. There's so many different ways this can play out. It just depends on the individual circumstances. But Mercury always does speak to, exchange of contracts, ideas, and, commerce and trade and travel. All those things are always there in one way or another. So from the retrograde, which starts on the 18th of July till this point, this could be the point where you hopefully become more clear about the new seeds that are going to be planted, because the new seeds will be reflected by Mercury being reborn as a morning star. The morning star Mercury corresponds to the sun god Apollo. Apollo is one of the most powerful divinities, and certainly comes from the Greek pantheon. But even Rumen talks about Apollo through Babylonian astrology, corresponding to Mercury as the morning star, which is pure divine seeds and inspiration in our thoughts. These are pure divine seeds that sort of get planted, if you like, in our consciousness, in our mind. So it's the spark of divine energy being birthed in our mind. So that's it's pretty special, right? But the main thing to realize about this is that this is where you give birth and plant new seeds. So depending on what's going on in your circumstances and your life story, we're just coming out of the evening star. We're still in the Mercury evening star cycle. And so this part of the cycle corresponds to the previous part when Mercury was a morning star, and we may have, started certain projects or certain connections, networking, certain ideas, so on and so forth. And then Mercury became an evening star early June, I think it was. I think it was about the 8th of June when Mercury became the evening star. And so we're in that cycle still, and we are seeing the fruits, because the evening star corresponds to the fruits, the manifestation of the seeds that were birthed in the morning star. So this happens several times a year with Mercury, because Mercury has a very different movement relative to its heliacal cycles from the other planets, and it happens several times a year. And so that's why we experience it more than we do with the other planets, for instance. And although you may think, well, I don't notice this that much. These changes don't seem to be happening as much as you're suggesting, let's say. Well, the things that you probably are not looking at is, when does Mercury appear in the sky, number one, and where does that appear in your Babylonian chart, right? And I'll circle back to that in a minute. Let me just continue with the Cazimi conjunction here. Is definitely a portal for new seeds to be born, to be planted. And this is about really trusting our intuition as well, because from an evolutionary perspective, Mercury retrograde goes right into our intuition, right brain. And the Cazimi means that Mercury is in the heart of the sun. So it's fusing with the light of the sun. And in this case, Mercury is going to be reborn as a morning star, which is the sun god Apollo, which is the god of truth and light, but it's also the divine seeds that we plant during that time. Now, the next chart I want to show you is, so this is, we're going back to the 31st of July. This is the Cazimi, okay, in the Babylonian chart. See how Mercury is shaded grey? Now, Mercury shaded grey, according to this program, means that Mercury is invisible. This is the Cazimi, okay? Now, let me just show you this graph here. Can I move this? Okay, so on the left-hand side, there's a window with lots of numbers and dates and so on and so forth. On the left-hand side, you can choose which planet you want to look at. What we're looking at here is the heliacal phase of a planet. In this case, we want to look at Mercury. So if you look at the first line, the date says 31st of July, 2025, CNJ, which stands for conjunction. Okay, that's the conjunction of Sun and Mercury, the Cazimi, which is at 13 Cancer, Babylonian, and 9 degrees Leo, tropical. The next column, where you see MF, that stands for morning first, which means Mercury is going to appear for the first time after the 31st of July as a morning star. M means morning, F means first, on the 16th of August 2025. Now, that's because this is dependent on latitude. That date might differ depending on your latitude, but I would say many latitudes across the globe are likely to have Mercury appear on this day, or it could be before, or it could be a few days later, but it'll be somewhere around these dates here. Okay. And it appears on the 16th of August. This is based for USA, actually. This chart was done for USA. So where are we? 16th of August, that's the first appearance of Mercury as a morning star. And that occurs at 10 degrees Babylonian, Cancer. And it occurs at 5 degrees Leo, tropical. So you can look at your Babylonian chart. Where's 10 degrees of Cancer in your Babylonian chart? And or you can look at your tropical chart and see where 5 degrees Leo is. Both those places could be important for Mercury's appearance. Now, they're the dates, so keep those in mind. Now, what does it mean when Mercury appears? Well, what it means is that the conjunction that was formed on the 31st of July, the cazimi, whatever was seeded at that time now starts to begin to be seen. When the way the ancients looked at the sky was when something appeared in the sky, it was a sign from the divine source creation to all things. Everything that appeared in the sky was some type of sign. So when a planet conjuncts the sun and then goes invisible, which I showed you here, Mercury is invisible. So Mercury's invisibility means that Mercury is in the underworld. Let's just have a look at something here, actually. Just looking at when did Mercury go invisible? Because that's that period is important to note. Okay, here we go. So yeah, it's going to be one more day there. So this is Mercury visible. Okay, this is 9th of July. And so from the 10th of July, Mercury becomes invisible. Okay. And so for the invisibility period, right, is basically connected to Mercury now has dipped into the underworld from the 10th of July, meaning that there's some transformation, metamorphosis going on because Mercury, like any other planet, when it goes invisible, it means it's not visible in the sky. So it's dipped into the underworld. So it's preparing for its new cycle. Before it prepares, it goes through a metamorphosis. It goes through a death before it's reborn. And so it becomes invisible on the 10th of July, and then by the 31st, by the 18th of July, it becomes retrograde. Then on the 31st of July, it forms a conjunction to the sun, where it's still invisible, as I showed you. And it does not appear, Mercury does not appear on the eastern horizon, right, as a morning star. Now, Mercury is not that easy to see, but it can be seen. It just depends on your latitude. It depends on the conditions of the sky, where you are on the globe, etc. But regardless of that, Mercury's appearance is said to be on the 16th of August for most latitudes. So let's back up. We've got Mercury entering Leo on the 27th of June, tropical. Then we've got Mercury moving through Leo, right? And then on the 18th of July, he goes retrograde, starts to move backwards. Then by the 31st of July, oh, sorry, let's go back to here. Let me just start that again. 27th of June, Mercury's in Leo. By the 10th of July, Mercury becomes invisible. He's in the underworld. When planets are in the underworld, they are dealing with they're dealing with God, right? They're having conversations with God. Any planet is actually doing that. There's many different layers to this, but that's one idea as well. The planet's actually dealing the archetype, the divinity, that God itself is dealing with things in the spiritual plane, right? It's working things out because it wants to prepare, right, for when it comes back up into the sky. That's its rebirth when it appears back in the sky and it starts a new cycle. That's what these heliacal cycles are. So 10th of July, Mercury becomes invisible. It's invisible for quite some time. By the 31st of July, it forms a conjunction to the Sun, which is the cazimi. Its first appearance is on the 16th of August as a morning star, which is at about 10 degrees Babylonian and at about 5 degrees tropical Leo. Those are the dates to keep in mind that can be very important. And, when you're just looking at your own birth chart, just, hopefully you've taken a pen and you've made a note of those dates that I've just mentioned, and the key points connecting to those dates. And overall, just keep in mind that, Mercury is being reborn here as Apollo, the morning star, and it's a seeding of a new cycle. And where that shows up on the 16th of August relative to your Babylonian or tropical chart are the zones where things will happen on a mercurial level. Okay, I'm going to leave it there. Oh, yes. Thank you. The divine god Apollo, I think, just dipped in and said, hang on, you forgot something. This is what I forgot. The cazimi, which is on the 31st of August, 1st of August or 31st of July, look at the aspect. It's opposite Pluto. So that cazimi portal is very, very intense because of the opposition from Pluto in Aquarius. So there's something very deep from a soul level that's being seeded here. Furthermore, when Mercury appears, its heliacal appearance, which is on the 16th of August, which, as I said, was at 10 degrees Cancer Babylonian and 5 degrees tropical Leo, well, 5 degrees tropical Leo places it opposite Pluto again, but even closer in terms of orbs. So this cycle of Mercury going retrograde in Leo, dipping into the underworld, becoming invisible, metamorphosizing, having a chat with God, sitting down, having a cup of coffee or a cup of tea, having a chat with God about what it's the other thing that I wanted to say about that was like it's like Mercury's having a chat. That's you having a chat with God about everything you've been doing in Mercury's previous cycle. Right? What's worked, what hasn't worked, what ideas have you had? What ideas might you now reconsider? What new ideas have you got? What, just everything really relative to your consciousness, your mind, your thoughts. So you're having a chat with God about it and trying to work out what you're going to do to fix certain things or change certain things. And, at a deep core spiritual level, this is about actually having for lack of a better word, a deep and meaningful spiritual conversation with God about where you're at in your life right now. What are you doing to, to be more aligned with God and with source and with your chart. The script of your life is your chart. And every time a planet dips into the underworld, we have an opportunity to have a chat with God about what we've been doing relative to that planet, everything that that planet symbolizes. So going back to Pluto, this journey of Mercury and this new cycle of Mercury, which is Mercury being reborn as a morning star, who is Apollo, the truth, the light, and the seeding of divine ideas is very much linked into the archetype energy presence of Pluto. So there can be very powerful conversations, networking connections with certain people that you may find that it could be a very powerful person, a very powerful engagement, very powerful networking, transformative. Now if this comes in from an ego, personality based level and greed, which is the biggest fucking problem on this planet, it's not the planet's problem, it's humanity's fucking problem, greed. I mean, they charge us for water. In what fucking sane reality does one have to pay for water, the most natural resource of the earth? So that's what sort of, twisted, diabolical fucking reality we live in relative to humans, because it is humans that created these systems. It wasn't God. It wasn't Mother Earth. Anyway, I'm digressing. So I was just trying to make a point. If you are, if this energy is being approached from that pure greed, I want to control this person or that group or whatever kind of level, then that's going to be problematic because Pluto, when it's coming through a real personality, unconscious, greedy, power hungry level, the distortions come up and the conflicts come up because Pluto is power struggles at that personality level. So for some, I guess it will be that. But for those of us who are more inspired and driven by soul and spirit and essence and purpose and meaning and inspiration and happiness and joy and being tuned into, the rhythms of the cosmos and the rhythms of life and understanding more deeply our soul's mission, then this portal is extremely powerful. So I'll leave it there and I'll see you soon. If you are interested in connecting with me, chatting with me, having a look at your chart from multiple levels and layers, you can just send me an email. Okay, so I'll see you soon because there's something else that I want to talk about, and that will be Venus passing through the Pleiades. That's a gorgeous little portal. That's coming up soon. I will do that as a separate recording. Okay, much love. Talk to you soon.